on the subject of Chelsea and Simon, no doubt, again, you'll be getting sick to death of us telling you congratulations on that great interview with John Terry on your own Upfront podcast. And Terry opened up about a whole bunch of things. But what he did open up on was the perceived power of the Chelsea dressing room, of which he was a very big part. And he illustrated that in a story that he told about one Andre Villas-Boas when AVB was the man in charge of the club. And again, it illustrated this aspect of player power.
So when AVB come in, we went to Hong Kong, I think, and I'm sitting in economy on a 13-hour flight. And we've got Josh McEachran, Nathaniel Chalobah, a couple of other young players, all in first class. And this was part of AVB's going, no player's bigger than me.
Right.
Everyone's the same. So I'm going on the plane going, no, we're not going anywhere until these young players go back in economy and the first team players that have built this club to where we are today go back in first. AVB comes up. What's the problem? I'm going, well, we're not going anywhere until the young players move. And to be fair to the young players, they're going, this JT, it's really uncomfortable, we'll go back. And I'm going, no, it's not your decision. Has to come from, he has to own it. In the end, it spins, so all first team players fly first, younger players go back economy. And he tried to make a statement day one, and he failed instantly because I promise you, the plane wasn't going. And if it was going, it would have gone without myself, Frank and Didier.
Interesting. So John Terry was saying, no, AVB had to own the situation. He had to own the decision. And Terry, probably not for the first time, got his way. Simon, I know you can expand a bit more on no doubt what John had to say maybe off mic to you on that. What's your take on that, Martin? Because you're big in player power and how to cope with it, how to manage it.
Well, I have absolutely no problem in dealing with big players. The big players who have won things for you, absolutely.
What would you have done in that situation?
Well,
if
I've got
Terry
to tell you
pulled
this.
That one on you?
First of all, Bose is trying to make a statement. So he must have got the temperature of the room completely wrong in that situation. He must have thought that he was going to win, that the players would acquiesce and they would head down to the bottom of the plane and allow the younger lads to come up. But he's obviously picked it wrongly, because John Terry has argued and said about that he would have that plane wouldn't have gone or would have gone without him and Frank Lampard and Didier Drogba, boys who are obviously big players running the show. Well, I have got to say to you this here. If I had put myself into that situation where I thought that the major players were going to rebel, I would have driven that plane myself and taken and left them at the airport. I would have done that, absolutely, because the minute Villas-Boas decides that the players will have to be moved back up again, then he's lost the dressing room. If he loses the dressing room over that, he'll lose over tactics, he'll lose over everything. And that's the point.
And so you then handed advantage to Terry. You
hand the advantage to absolutely. And you had somebody on here about 5 or 6 months ago, an ex-Chelsea player who was talking about the
John Obi Mikel.
Who?
John Obi Mikel.
Who was saying, well done, thank you. Who was saying the same thing, that the players ran it. Well, they didn't need a manager then, if that was the case. Those players, don't get me wrong, they won big, and that's great, delighted. But somewhere along the way, you have to be still to be managed. And whatever you say, players still need to be managed somewhere. And if John Terry, I know Simon's got a lot of time for it, and John Terry's been a fabulous footballer, great centre-half and a great leader. But at the end, I'm sorry, you're going to have to be led, John, and you're going to have to listen to what I'm saying. You might not necessarily agree with it, but I'm going to win this. And you're going to sit down at the back of that plane, and you're going to stay there, or you're going to stay at the airport, wherever that airport may be. And I'm not just saying that now because it sounds as if I'm really big. I would have done that as a manager.
You wouldn't have picked that fight, though, would you?
I probably, to be fair, Sam, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have picked that fight. I think I would have judged the situation if it was Villas-Boas' very first day in charge. It may be a different issue. But if he's been there a number of weeks, you're going to have to work with these players in that sense. So don't lose a battle that you're going to lose in the manner in which you've lost it. That's the point.
I mean, Simon, you always say the manager is your champion.
Indeed.
There and then, it doesn't surprise me that Terry and the others tried that and tried it on.
See, context.
But what surprises me is that AVB buckled.
See, context is everything, because I had made the observation about Mourinho and also about the culture of the dressing room and about the strength of that dressing room and the spine of that dressing room being Terry, Cech, Drogba, whoever else is in there, and the fact that perhaps potentially they'd carried this team to the Champions League, not Roberto Di Matteo. And I talked about this culture of potentially Andre Villas-Boas being brought in by the owner to break up this dressing room strength. Ashley Cole, this sort of noise that was going on in the dressing room, maybe it's time to break it up a little bit. And then I had perceived it to be that Roman had backed away and let the players run. So then John went off on this story about this is what, and he said there may be something in that, because this is what Andreas Villas-Boas did. He looked at this situation, put us on a plane, and put the young players on there. So it's a balancing act. And you need, listen, the moment a manager picks a fight with a player, whichever way he picks it, I had a manager do it once, picked a fight with Clinton Morris and then lost that fight, not metaphorically and physically, but lost the battle. Dressing room goes with it, and it's a fine line, and it sounds like some antiquated, archaic mythology that goes in football, but it isn't. You can be the most successful person in the world. You walk in a dressing room and you say the wrong thing. The players are waiting for it anyway. They're looking for the crack. They're looking for the opportunity to get in between the wall and the wallpaper and have an excuse for something they haven't done. And they can find it by a manager picking a fight that he doesn't win. You pick a fight. A good fight is not one you turn up to. A good fight is one you win. And if you pick a fight, you better win it. And to pick a fight on a plane and put junior players in business class and senior players in the back, I don't think either one of them come out of that conversation particularly well. I don't think John and the players and their perspective, what they're entitled to, comes out very well. And I don't think the manager picking that fight would have come out. And if I'd have been the owner of the football club, I'd have gone to him, well, that's not what I told you to do. It does sound like a fairly crazy thing for Villas-Boas to do.
Well,
because he had to
win. He had
to win it.
Absolutely. I think Simon makes the point, and quite rightly so. I don't think anybody has come out of that with great credit. And that's what I thought as well, too, some months ago when I was listening to
John
Mikel saying the same thing.
He was on in here with us, yeah.
He was absolutely. And he was almost, it was almost in a sort of a joking fashion and saying it didn't matter what manager came in. I don't think Mourinho would have stood for that there. And I think on the back of Mourinho, I think that any manager coming in that they might look slightly disparagingly at for a while until you start to win. But as you say, this is a big thing. Players, big players in charge of proceedings. You can still manage that. You don't have to break it up. You can manage the situation.
But John Obi Mikel, Martin, wasn't just telling us about players going from first class to economy. He was telling us how the big players at Chelsea got managers out the club.
I know. It's astonishing.
But he was talking about one particular manager. He was talking about John Terry and the feeling that the manager Benitez had a particular issue with Terry, and the players sided with Terry, a bit like a smaller version of the players siding with John Hartson. But their version was a bigger version.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They decided to go right behind it, but there was never going to be this accord with Benitez because they all hated him
that's
because of the Liverpool connection.
Exactly.
That was Martin. But did you have a player, and away from the John Hartson incident?
I didn't listen. The John that I'm having a bit of a joke there.
Yeah, of course you are.
Because I was actually John did confront me, and he had a point, believe it or not, which I'd forgotten. He actually scored the goal that won the game. Imagine that. I should have been sacked for not remembering.
Did you have a player
that.
Though, Martin, who seriously did test your authority publicly?
Not publicly.
A decision like the one Villas-Boas made?
Absolutely. But strangely enough, I did, just as you happened to mention it. And it was none other than Gareth Barry, whom I had great regard for. Gareth Barry was looking to leave the football club when I arrived at Aston Villa in 2006. And I said to him, Gareth, whatever happens, I'd like to build a team around you. But if you but this time next year, if you still feel the same way, you can go. But I promise you, I'll get you into the England squad. I'll get you back into it. And within the year, he was back in the squad, and he did brilliantly for me. But there was a stage then when he was looking to leave to go to Liverpool, and I was doing some work in the Euros, was it, or the for TV, when I pick up this article and I see where he is castigating me for being away and not dealing with his proposed move to Liverpool, which was all news to me at the end of the day. So he had got this journalist, his friend journalist, to write this article, and I was apoplectic, absolutely apoplectic. So I get on the phone to him. Don't you dare tell me where I should be. You're a player. I've got you where you are now at this minute, although he had been a brilliant player before that. And I was just reminding him. And and then, so when I got home, I docked him a couple of weeks' wages and said, no, if you want to deal with the situation, you come and talk to me. Don't do it through a journalist, a third party, who might have got a few bob from the newspaper he was writing for doing the article. Absolutely. So the whole thing eventually calmed down when Liverpool wouldn't pay the money for him, said they didn't have the money, and then they spent £20 million about 2 weeks later in buying Robbie Keane. So I don't think Gareth was too happy. Anyway, he settled down. We all settled down. I didn't give him back his 2 weeks' wages, far from it. And he ended up having an absolutely phenomenal season for us the next year. And then he got his move to Manchester City, where he ended up winning leagues and stuff like this here. So, and a great lad. And I was really, really surprised about him and apoplectic with him because it was him.
Yeah. I always remember Gareth Barry being good enough to come on my first ever talkSPORT show, Martin, so I haven't forgotten him about that. He didn't let me down. Did you want your top players to challenge you, though, Martin?
I didn't mind. Absolutely didn't mind. There were loads of challenges at Celtic. Big players. I want to see Henrik Larsson, Chris Sutton, Neil Lennon, Paul Lambert, Alan Thompson, all big players in the right, really. And they would be in. We could be 2-0 up at half time and they'd be fighting with each other and you had to sort of settle it down. Yeah. But it was great. I loved it as long as I felt as if I could deal with it, and I could deal with it.
You see the list there that you name at Celtic? It's incredible, isn't it, when you think of it?
Yeah.
Baldy,
terrific
Larsson,
football.
Sutton.
Baldy was in a really bad temper. He was a very, very big lad and he didn't suffer fools. And if he was in a really bad temper, and one day he had the great Stilian Petrov up against the wall at half time. We were actually leading 3-0 at the time. And I had a look at Stilian and I'd look at Bobo and I thought, I'm sorry, Stilian, you're on your own here.
One final one on this. But when players push it that bit, as JT did with that story that he regaled to Simon, how would Brian Clough have dealt with that?
Brian Clough would have done exactly the same. He would have left them behind. He would have left them behind and said, again, I'll take Simon's point, absolutely. Brian Clough wouldn't have put himself in that position to begin with anyway. But even if he had done, he would have left those players behind at the airport and said to them, make your own way home. As he did apparently with Gary Birtles. I wasn't there at the football club, but Birtles was arguing with some chuntering away about something or other, whatever it was, and they stopped the bus and he told Birtles to get off, and it was only midnight or something like this here, and it was halfway between London and Nottingham, and he said, you can find your own way home. I think Birtles had to pay about 200 quid for a taxi. So anyway, it was funny. You wouldn't have argued with Brian Clough in that sense, and that's the whole point. And all you do is diminish your authority. And if you've picked the argument and the players have won, you might as well pack your bags.
I wonder what that story told us more about, though, Simon. The strength of John Terry and his influence, or the weakness of Villas-Boas?
I think it shows you the strength, the weakness of Villas-Boas. The judgment.
It was never going to work.
Wasn't going to. Well, it's certainly, particularly if that was an early scenario, and trying to push, Listen, I'm all on for trying to be authoritative. There's no question about it. You want to try and sort of put your own personality on it. But if your personality doesn't match up with those players and they're going to dismiss you, then you're in trouble.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.